Good evening from Vatican City. I'm Bill Carey for YNN. Thousands of pilgrims and tourists from across New York State have gathered here in Rome this week for an event that will occur tomorrow here at St. Peter's Square.
It's called canonization, the Church's formal recognition of sainthood. 7 people are due to be honored, but our attention tonight will be focused on 2 of the 7. There's Kateri Tekakwitha, the Lily of the Mohawks and the first Native American to be honored in this way by the Church. Kateri, whose name is pronounced Gadali by natives, faced a host of struggles ranging from personal health to the stability of her Mohawk community. We'll also tell the story tonight of Marianne, the leader of a religious order in Syracuse who helped to establish much of the area's healthcare system, then traveled thousands of miles to Hawaii to aid those stricken by a disfiguring and deadly disease, now known as Hansen's, but commonly called leprosy.
We call our program tonight The Saints of Upstate New York.
It's a story nearly 400 years old, the story of a woman who lived just 24 years, a life marked by loss and personal suffering, a life changed by teachings that tore her nation apart.
She was very poor in her life. She was very simple, but she was very direct and she was very insistent. And she found who Jesus was, and it wasn't what some of the images we have today, Christ the King and all that sort of thing. He was a simple person who led you to goodness.
200 years later, but not far away, another young woman took up a new life as a nun. She would educate children, minister to the sick. She would make a decision one day that would lead to a new challenge thousands of miles away, spending the remainder of her adult life caring for those stricken by a devastating disease and left to die in exile.
There were times of sadness and maybe a loneliness and discouragement, but through her belief in her own goodness, the belief in the goodness of others, and trusting in God's care for her and in faith, she knew she was doing her work in life as it was revealed to her to do.
2 women, born of very different cultures, separated by hundreds of years, who continue to touch lives in the 21st century.
I don't think it's complicated or difficult to realize that no matter what culture it is, there are always good people.
They're given to us as examples of what it means to follow Christ, to do the right thing.
2 women who now share a new title from the Catholic Church. It was the 17th century, and the old world was slowly swallowing up the new.
European powers sent explorers to hunt for land and resources. Along the way, they ran into the people for whom this land was home, the Haudenosaunee.
6 nations joined in a confederacy that stretched from huge inland lakes in the west to a large river in the east that these new visitors would name for one of their explorers, Henry Hudson. Hudson, though an Englishman, had been hired by the Dutch, claiming territory for them. Slowly, they began trading with the easternmost nation of the Haudenosaunee, the Mohawk. The demand for goods from the New World, primarily furs, sped the pace for exploration, and soon other European powers began to move into the region to challenge the Dutch, primarily the French, who called the natives Iroquois.
And the French were their competitors. And the French were interested in expanding their territory for trade among the Iroquois.
But the French explorers did not just come to hunt for resources. They brought with them members of a new order of priests, missionaries called Jesuits. Their hunt was for souls.
They were really on fire with zeal. They were very enthusiastic. They really wanted to reach out to people and help people to know God.
Unlike Spanish missionaries who had demanded conversion to the faith, the Jesuits sought to win over these new people, often adopting a native lifestyle to win their trust and confidence.
You find dictionaries that the missionaries used because they came here and there was no common language. And they spent years, learning the language so as to reach out to these people and speak to them in their own language, and even to encourage a relationship with God in their own culture. The Jesuits wanted to use the indigenous culture in order to express their faith. So they didn't try to impose European culture on the Indians. They tried really to relate to them in their own language, cultural language as well.
Their first impulse was to eradicate whatever religion or concept they had of God, to eradicate that and then rebuild, rather than enculturate, to take what they have and see how that fits what we have and what merges and what works well together. There was a tension introduced because of that kind of procedure.
Initially, we saw them as disruptors because we had seen what had happened amongst the Hurons just north of us, those are our cousins, and how the Catholicism had actually undermined their society and created factionalism.
And I think they were afraid that the dilution would weaken the community and weaken their way of life, and that they would go and follow the missionaries rather than follow the traditional ways that really supported the family. The family was extremely important. Family culture, they were afraid of losing that, losing their tradition, and losing their strength as a nation too.
At first, the Jesuit encroachment had been an annoyance, but the leadership of the Mohawk Nation soon had had enough.
And we prosecuted them and persecuted them and executed them.
The slaughter might have continued, if not for the efforts of a leader of the Onondaga Nation, who had connected with this new faith.
A chief named Galagunte, and he converted to Catholicism, and under his direction, the Mohawks, the Onondagas, and the Oneidas backed away from their prosecution of the missionaries, and that enabled them to enter our country.
But the French brought more than just new ideas to the Mohawk. They also brought disease, illnesses to which their bodies had developed a defense, but viruses the Indians had no means to fight.
50, 60, 70, 80, 90% of a village would be killed by these new diseases. And this happened among the Mohawks: smallpox, measles, other diseases.
From the 1630s to the 1660s, every 5 years, with frightening regularity, there were epidemics breaking out amongst the Mohawks. They were absolutely devastating.
The story would have been a familiar one here at the site of a village along the Mohawk River. The villain here was a disease known as smallpox. Here, a Mohawk chief had taken as a wife an Algonquin woman who'd been taken prisoner, a woman who had converted to this new faith. The couple had a young daughter. When the outbreak came to an end, that 4-year-old child was an orphan, but she was also a survivor. She had battled back against the illness, but it did exact a cost.
Not only was she disfigured, but she also, her eyesight was badly affected by smallpox, and for the rest of her life she could not go out in the daytime hours without suffering a great deal of discomfort.
She could see shadows and light and sort of thing, but she had a problem with walking and doing things, and she stumbled a lot, and thus the name they gave her, Tekakwitha, which means one who stumbles.
It was in her small village that the Jesuits came to call, began to tell her the story of Christ, a story she embraced.
And to her, she found the answers to these changes that were taking place among the Mohawks within the Catholic faith. It promised her meaning, substance, stability, a type of direction for her life.
They see the Creator, much as we do, as the one who initiated, the one who gifted us with life. But they see that life as an intermingling of all life, not just themselves or us as being predominant. I think we've lost the real key to understanding that gift of the Creator. We became the top of the line, you know.
The divisions over this new religion continued to simmer.
Some Mohawks who wanted nothing to do with Catholicism, who hated it or despised it or just resisted it. And then you had others who were already secret Catholics, part Catholics, becoming Catholics. So in the same village you would have all kinds of different feelings. The villages then were still in contact with each other, but they were alienated from each other, and the Mohawk community was being pulled apart. Who was going to live here? Who was going to live there? It must have been a very trying time.
Quietly at first, Tekakwitha began to model her life on the teachings from the French priests.
The few things that are recorded about her is how she gave of herself to be with the sick people in her community and ministered, truly ministered to them, morning, noon, and night. That wasn't something new. They usually took care of their own people, but probably not to the depth or the degree that she did.
By the time she'd reached the age of 20, Tekakwitha was ready to give herself over to this new religion. The priest who baptized her gave her the name Catherine, or Kateri. Her own uncle, who had taken her in after the death of her parents, opposed conversion. Young Kateri soon joined an exodus of Mohawk Catholics to a settlement along the St. Lawrence River, known as Canonagua. There, she fully explored her new faith, even darker practices encouraged by some of the Jesuits, practices of mortification.
She wanted to duplicate the pain that Christ felt before his crucifixion, hence the self-flagellation, the denial of food, the walking through snow, the administering to the sick and ill. This is what she did, but it weakened her body.
Soon, the people of Canonagua and the Jesuit priests themselves considered Kateri someone special.
Before she died, and all through those last years as she learned about Jesus Christ, she would constantly pronounce, "I love you, Jesus. Jesus, I love you," that sort of thing. And I think she fell in love with Jesus. Francis of Assisi fell in love with Jesus. He fell in love with Jesus through the gospel. And I think as she studied more and learned more about the gospel, she saw Jesus as being the incarnation of that way of life that she was treasuring.
Having survived smallpox and having led a difficult life coping with its effects, Kateri struggled against recurring illness.
Physically, she was a small person. She was, they estimate, less than 5 feet tall. And she couldn't suffer the rigors of a difficult winter.
Kateri Tekakwitha was just 24 years old. On April 17th, 1680, she died. She'd been honored as a remarkable person in life. At her bedside, Jesuit missionaries believed in death, this half-blind, disfigured girl was touched by the hand of God.
The flesh of her skin cleared up, the pock marks were gone, and she was radiant. Now, I don't think irradiated in terms of glowing necessarily, but like a radiant figure would be, you know.
All those blemishes disappeared, and her face actually glowed, and it became very smooth and strikingly beautiful.
In the centuries since her passing, the tensions between Indians who have converted to Christianity and those who've held to native beliefs have continued to simmer. For some time, Kateri was a symbol of that internal struggle. But the passage of years and the honors from the Vatican have helped to ease those feelings.
I understood what she may have experienced, you know, going through this piety, going through the feeling of not being accepted. I actually was brought up in a Christian religion. I read the Bible 16 times, searching for spirituality. And I did find it within my own culture, the Iroquois, if you want to call it a religion. It's not really a religion, because what it is based on respect for each other, for humankind, for the natural world, to live in harmony and balance with each other, but also with the earth and all its elements.
Her example of self-sacrifice, of denial of her own personal wishes, of her absolute dedication to the community, are all very much traditional values. There was a hostility towards her by Longhouse people because, again, she was being used to promote an alien faith, an alien belief. But I think recently we've come to understand that she was very human. She was looking for something that would give her meaning, and she found it within the church, and for that we have to express our gratitude that they'd give her that comfort. And we have to see her within the context of her times.
That very simple dictum in the gospel, to go out to others and lend a hand, because that's the way to eternal life or eternal goodness. And it's a simple movement. It's a simple direction in one's life. You don't have to have a lot of money. She was very poor in her life. She was very simple, but she was very direct, and she was very insistent. And she found who Jesus was, and it wasn't what some of the images we have today, you know, Christ the King and all that sort of thing. He was a simple person who led you to goodness. And I think that's the value in what she's presenting to us today.
In an evolving world, it became a familiar scenario. There were some who had much, and many who had little. In Hessen, Germany, in the late 1830s, Peter Kobe was trying to shepherd his growing family through difficult times, eking out a living on a family farm. But Peter hoped for more, and soon he and his family were following a well-worn path, followed by millions in those years, as Europe became the old world, and dreams were realized to the west across the Atlantic Ocean. Peter Kobe, his wife, and children joined the migration, eventually making their way to a city along the newly dug Erie Canal, Utica.
There was a need to find work, and Utica was a booming city. Steam woolen mills were the big thing going here. They were bringing in coal from Pennsylvania to fire these mills in Utica that were creating all these knit goods, all these woolen goods.
And this town, in the mid-19th century, was a place the Kobes would feel at home.
West Utica was German and Polish. They had their own newspapers, their own language newspapers. They had their own social clubs, but they provided a workforce to this community that was extraordinary.
There are no records to show whether Peter Kobe found what he was looking for in America. His hands, so used to tilling the soil, now were focused on factory work, enough of a living to support his family and even buy a small house. But time took a toll, and after 2 decades of toiling in Utica factories, Peter Kobe was too ill to go on.
A young daughter named Barbara had made the family's trek from Germany to America at the age of just 2. By the 1850s, she'd taken up the task of providing for her parents and siblings, leaving school to take a job at a local woolen mill.
All those jobs in those days were tough. I mean, working in a factory in those days was not like working in a factory today. You didn't have OSHA, and you didn't have breaks, and you didn't have all the benefits that we enjoy today. It was tough work, particularly if you're a young kid.
There were few safety nets in the mid-19th century, It was a time when those in need often turned to the church for help, and Barbara knew her father needed help.
Nuns came to their house, Franciscan nuns, nursing nuns, and administered to the father. That was her real close-up and personal look at these sisters, at these nuns, and the good works that they were doing. You didn't have to be Catholic, you didn't have to have money, you didn't have to have anything. If you needed medical help, you got it. That up-close and personal look that she got from those nuns that came in to care for her father really was, I think, a determining factor in what she would do in her adult life.
Barbara Kolb's life was about to change. Her name, Kolb, had been Americanized. It was now Cope. Her father had died. Her brothers and sisters now were old enough to care for the family's needs. It was time for Barbara to follow her own path, which began at a convent in Syracuse.
She joined our congregation in 1862 at the age of 24 and was given the name of Sister Marianne.
She began her career as a school teacher, traveling across the region to places like Rome, Oswego, home to Utica, back to Syracuse. But she was soon called on to leave the classroom.
Her gifts, her administrative gifts, were beginning to shine. And shortly after a time, she was able to help the Sisters of St. Francis establish 2 wonderful hospitals in this area.
In Utica, there was St. Elizabeth's. In Syracuse, St. Joseph's. And steps she took early on would help in the early stages of a school that would give birth to Syracuse's largest public hospital, Upstate Medical.
The College of Medicine in Geneva was moving to the fledgling Syracuse University, and she said that she would welcome the young resident physicians to serve at St. Joseph's so that they could learn how to deal with patients at the hospital. The hospitals were unique in that they did not care about nationality, color, or religion. Anyone was served. Long before people were careful about cleanliness, which we are so aware of today, she insisted that the people in the hospital would wash their hands before dealing with patients.
I don't think she saw herself, certainly not at that point in her life, as doing anything unusual other than carrying out the works of the congregation to establish new ministries in these hospitals.
Her influence over the sisters in the early years of their community and in the early years of this diocese has touched almost every aspect of life here in central New York.
By the 1880s, Marianne Cope's path had taken her to the role of a leader of her order, given the title Mother. She may never have expected the change in course that lie ahead, a change that would take her half a world away.
A letter was coming across the United States from the government of Hawaii begging for sister nurses to care for the people who were suffering from the terrible disease of leprosy.
In a letter responding to that Hawaiian plea, Mother Marianne said she felt an irresistible force, drawing her to follow the call.
She did what she thought was hers to do. And her compassion, I think, is one of the characteristics that makes it stand out. She had a desire to help the most outcast.
Thought about it, prayed about it, and decided that she would send her sisters, and not only did she send her sisters, she went with them.
She spoke to the sisters. Our congregation only had about 100 sisters at the time, and she asked for volunteers, and out of the 100, 35 sisters volunteered to go with Mother to the Sandwich Islands, which she knew nothing about.
In the end, Mother Marianne and 6 of the volunteers would make the journey. It began with a 6-day-long cross-country trip by railroad to San Francisco, then aboard a steamer for the trek across the Pacific.
She was terribly seasick. Most of the time, she was in very poor condition.
And you know, that must have been a terribly wrenching experience for her to leave everything that she knew, but she knew she was doing it for the greater glory.
November 8th, 1883. After 8 days at sea, the nuns from Syracuse reached what were commonly called the Sandwich Islands. The natives called them Hawaii. The king of the islands had asked for help. His nation in fear as a growing epidemic of leprosy, now known as Hansen's disease, swept the population. No one knew its cause or how it spread. Mother Marianne and her fellow travelers from Syracuse were on their way to their first assignment at a hospital in the capital of Honolulu.
They were greeted by government officials, and at that time, the people with leprosy were sent to that hospital.
The accounts that I've read say that it was in pretty deplorable state in terms of cleanliness and hygiene. And she rolled up her sleeves, and she and the sisters literally scrubbed that building, made it clean, improved the hygiene of both the patients and the staff. And she was, I think, a kind of a take-charge person. She could see what needed to be done and sort of mobilize others to help get it done.
The spread of Hansen's had brought drastic action from the Hawaiian government. Once patients were confirmed to have the disease, they were sent by boat to exile on a tiny peninsula on the island of Molokai. There they would live out the rest of their days, never permitted to return home.
I think she understood the king's dilemma in doing that, and which is why she really wanted to go to help those folks, because she understood their separation from loved ones.
10 years before Mother Marianne arrived at Honolulu, a Belgian priest assigned to a parish in the capital had volunteered to travel to Molokai to minister to the hundreds of stranded there. It wasn't long after the Franciscan nuns arrived in Hawaii that Father Damien faced a new challenge. He'd become a victim of Hansen's himself.
When she arrived in Honolulu and stayed there for 5 years at Branch Hospital, she then learned of his work, and she also knew when he became ill.
November 1888. Aware of Damien's challenges and asked by the Hawaiian government to open new facilities for the exiled patients, Mother Marianne and her sisters made the journey to Kalaupapa. It was the place Hawaii sent victims to die, away from their homes, their loved ones. Fear over Hansen's or leprosy had driven the state to this extreme solution. Mother Marianne and her fellow nuns went to work trying to make this place a new home for their patients.
She brought joy to the sick. She nursed the sick. She changed the bandages of the people with this dreaded disease. She did what Damien had done. She dug the graves and prepared bodies for burial. She sent for catalogs so that she could teach the women how to create dresses that were fashionable for the day. She helped them with their Hawaiian culture. She and the sisters who worked in Kalaupapa learned the language. They learned the customs.
There was never a sign that her resolve to do the hard work wavered.
Somehow God has placed this desire in her heart to follow him and to serve brothers and sisters who were in need. And she, in a sense, preached the gospel in that way.
The workload was heavy and promised to grow. Father Damien, the pioneer at Kalaupapa, had fallen victim to the very disease he came to fight. And now he was losing his own battle.
As he got more weak from the illness, he asked her to take over his work upon his death.
A year after the Sisters of St. Francis arrived, Father Damien died. Mother Marianne, who was overseeing the entire operation now, would do that work for another 19 years.
She sealed her fate. She never left the island again, never came back to Syracuse, never saw her family. She wrote letters to her nephew Peter and expressed this sense of loneliness, but still felt that she was doing what God wanted her to do for these dear, dear people.
By 1918, Mother Marianne, now 80 years old, having cared for the sick for 6 decades, now required care for herself. Age had taken its toll, and death was near.
The children, whom she loved dearly, would come and sing outside her window, and the sisters would wheel her little wheelchair out to the veranda so that she could see the children and hear their singing.
On the 9th of August, her strength fading, Mother Marianne insisted on joining the other Sisters of St. Francis at mealtime.
She asked that the sisters would wheel her into so that she could have lunch with them. And of course she didn't eat anything, but she wanted to be with them.
Later that day, she died.
Very peacefully, with a blessing on her lip, and very quietly.
She was much like us. She came out of an ordinary family. She had a desire about a life vocation and a life choice. She had skills, personal skills, that allowed her to do some very extraordinary things. But I think for us, she's the model, she's the pattern, she's an example, whatever words we want to use, that encourages us to look for the goodness in others, that encourages us to reach out, and that, yes, we're going to fall short, but I don't think all her days were perfect joy either. I think there were times of sadness and maybe loneliness and discouragement, but through her belief in her own goodness, the belief in the goodness of others, and trusting in God's care for her and in faith, she knew she was doing her work in life as it was revealed to her to do.
It was very simple. It was love. She saw people who were in need. How do you ever explain how people fall in love with each other? You don't. But Marianne saw this need, saw the people of Hawaii in need, eventually saw the lepers in need and said, we've got to do something.
We talk about one life and what one life can do. Incredible, incredible story.
It's a word that was never used in the original versions of the Bible, the Hebrew, or the Greek text. It was the Latin version of the scriptures that first used the word sanctus to describe something or someone considered holy. There were variations through the years until the English word saint appeared. It came to be used to describe those who'd achieved the ultimate goal of Christians, entry into heaven.
A person who in a human world of sinfulness exhibited holiness. And in Christianity, there is this tension between sinfulness and holiness.
The church tries to teach people how to live, and so exemplary human beings are important. People who are not necessarily perfect, but people who in one way or another are exemplary.
They're given to us as examples of what it means to follow Christ, to do the right thing.
But in those early days, many Christians did not just look upon the departed as saints. They'd often look within their own communities and declare people still very much alive as being saints, destined for a place in heaven.
It started very early, and it started actually very informally, which is hard for us to realize. But until the Middle Ages, saints were usually proclaimed locally. People recognized certain individuals in their midst as having lived especially exemplary lives.
Over time, Christian communities started to extol the virtues of particular people whom they regarded as saintly people, exemplars of holiness, and they established them as their saints. They're sanctified people. They're holy people. And there are thousands of these locally recognized saints.
Soon, the Catholic Church was growing worried over the thousands who had now been awarded the title. First, the leadership ordered that the faithful had to wait until someone had died before any proclamation of sainthood. And the Vatican moved to impose some standards.
I think 993 is the first time that a pope named, canonized, in other words, put the stamp of approval on a particular saint. And in later centuries, the papacy took away from the local communities the right to declare who is and who is not a saint.
The life of the person is examined very carefully. Any writings that he or she might have had that are still extant are looked at.
The Vatican has a bureaucracy, and one of those pieces of bureaucracy is what they call the Congregation for the Causes of Saints. It's an organization of people who examine cases that come to them.
Beyond evidence that someone had led a holy life, the church wanted some documentation before officially declaring that they were in heaven. The church was looking for proof of miracles.
This is the final touch on who a saint is. A virtuous person, but not just any virtuous person, but a miraculously virtuous person.
Because of these visible signs, these so-called miracles, we can be sure, according to the teachings of the church, that they are in heaven and they are with God.
Miraculous healings, cures, whatever you want to say, are examined carefully by medical experts, and they're showing that the medical experts have to determine that there is no medical reason that this should have happened. In other words, it shouldn't have happened, but somehow it did happen.
We had come back from Ireland, and Kate was not feeling well.
It was 1992, and Mary Mahoney's 14-year-old daughter, Kate, was sick. With frightening speed, Kate Mahoney ended up in Crouse Hospital in Syracuse, undergoing abdominal surgery. The diagnosis was cancer.
She had a large tumor that was the size of a small basketball or a large grapefruit.
The surgery had gone well, the cancer found and removed. Chemotherapy would follow, but young Kate was on her way to recovery. At least that's what she and her family thought. That was when new problems arose. Kate was undergoing routine testing when a new, terrifying crisis erupted.
She went into cardiac arrest for 25 minutes.
The test showed Kate's organs were beginning to shut down.
Dr. Acevedo, who was the director of the intensive care, said that she had an Apache score, which is like she had like 98% chance of not making it.
Being a younger person, certainly the odds would be a little better, but most folks with that degree of organ failure usually don't survive.
Kate Mahoney's father had been a longtime aide to a Syracuse congressman, James Hanley, who had a cousin who'd become a sister of St. Francis in Syracuse, Sister Mary Lawrence. The sister had also taken on a personal crusade to win sainthood for the former leader of her order, Mother Marianne Cope. The Vatican had already found Mother Marianne to have led a holy life. The official designation was venerable. Sister Mary Lawrence was sure that Marianne was capable of interceding on behalf of those in search of a miracle.
She called and asked if I would be able to, accept her up there and talk with her, and perhaps she could, lay the relic on Kate's head. No problem.
What followed were months of prayers by the Sisters of St. Francis and others, all seeking the recovery of a very sick teenage girl.
This is not one of the miracles where the crutches are thrown away or anything like that.
Progress would be slow, and prayer targeted as each medical crisis came and went.
She would get through, the lungs were going to be okay. So then it would be, okay, the blood is looking better. In the interim here, you'd get infections that would come up, and the nuns, what they would do is they would pray. I would call Sister Mary Lawrence, I'd say, pray for her kidney today. Pray for the kidneys, pray for the lungs. So that each time I knew that there was an area that they really needed to get a hold of, I would call the sisters would send out the word.
At Krause, Kate Mahoney was beating the odds. She was on the road to recovery.
This is really when there was the change in terms of hope. Although we always had hope, there was more of a release of some of the tension.
The only one who seemed unaware of the behind-the-scenes effort was the young girl herself, who'd spent months under intense treatment with little memory of what was going on.
So I was in a very unfamiliar, very scary place 99% of the time. And in this one moment, my mom was not in the room, my dad was not in the room. Sister Mary Lawrence came in, placed what I thought was saran wrap on my head, and this is very scary. And she left, and my mom came in later, and I strained to say, you know, who was that? What happened? And my mom very gently said, you know, oh, honey, that was Sister Mary Lawrence, and that was the relic of Mother Marianne Cope because, you know, you recovered, and it's a miracle. And I was sort of like, how long have I been out? I mean, that seems really intense, and I have absolutely no ownership of any of that.
Everyone aware of the case spoke of a miracle. Everyone but the young girl who'd survived.
Total strangers were coming up to me and saying, you know, this was a miracle, you're so blessed, and oh, this was so awful, and everything happened. And I just wanted to push back on all of that because I felt like they had taken memories that should be mine.
Eventually, Kate would come around. By then, the Syracuse diocese began to review her case. It wanted evidence to hand to the Vatican. Was this a miracle?
I was convinced that I would say an oath on the Bible and probably burst into flames. I mean, it was very base level kind of fear, because I just thought this is a really big deal, and I don't want to be the reason that it gets screwed up, you know? And obviously I didn't burst into flames, and the medical records were unanimously approved because what happened was so amazing.
Amazing enough for the Vatican to move the case of Marianne Cope further along the road to sainthood. Beatification. It was now Blessed Marianne. The Pope agreed that Kate Mahoney had been saved by a miracle.
I never in a million years thought that I would be in that place at that time.
It was not magic. We had all the use of the hands of all these wonderful medical people, okay? And in that spirit of caring, there was, you know, there was also the hope and the prayer. It was a joint thing.
I think we have a darn good team here, both the doctors, physicians, and our allies, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised if there was some intervention from above.
It happened to me. If somebody came up to me and said, I don't believe it was a miracle, then I would say, okay. You know, I mean, I don't feel that it's my job to convince people. I just am happy to share that I do believe very deeply that it happened to me and that it could happen to others.
And it did. Sharon Smith, a Navy veteran, had entered St. Joseph's Hospital for cancer surgery. Again, the surgery had gone well, but the complications reported by doctors put Sharon's life in jeopardy.
He diagnosed the pancreatitis then, but he also told me at that time when I woke up from that surgery that, Sharon, I don't think you're going to make it. And I said, well, okay. I mean, what else do you say when somebody tells you you're not going to make it?
Sharon Smith slipped in and out of consciousness, unaware that Sister Mary Lawrence, the champion of Mother Marianne, had again enlisted an army of prayer to urge heavenly intervention. The first clue for Sharon was when she came to.
I was still alive, and the prayer kept continuing for a whole entire year, actually.
The doctor in charge of Sharon's case said divine intervention was the only explanation for her survival.
He said someone higher above than him helped heal me. I always believed in miracles, I just didn't think it would happen to me.
Sharon's case, again investigated by an independent panel, was accepted as a miracle by the Vatican. Mother Marianne was now declared Saint Marianne, and a date set for her canonization.
I don't think it's changed me. I think I'm still me, Sharon. And I guess I just believe in miracles a little more.
The Vatican recognized sainthood for Marianne Cope less than 100 years after her death in Hawaii. The wait for Kateri Tekakwitha was much longer, a wait shared by many Native Americans.
They regard her as their saint, their personal saint, their intercessor, and sometimes they put it in words that are so commonsensical. They say, well, she's up there now, and she knows us. She's an Indian, we're Indians. We can talk to her. She'll talk to God. She can go right over and speak to Christ. You know, it's a familial kind of thing. We're related to her. She's related to the other saints, and she'll now put in a good word for us. That's kind of a wonderful religious behavior.
All children are looking for heroes. They saw in her a native hero. Now, in years past, looking for a native hero, especially in the church, would be like looking for a needle in a haystack, because there weren't any.
The reports of Kateri's transformation in death, skin that went from pockmarked to clear, had long been considered a miracle. But it wasn't until the case of a young boy in Washington State that she moved from the ranks of blessed to saint. Young Jake Finkbonner was injured in a 2006 soccer game. The next day, his medical problems began.
A terrible flesh-eating disease that was destroying his face. The doctors intervened and did as much as they could do. At some point, they said there's nothing more we can do. And at that time, I think toward the end of that session, a group of people did gather together, native peoples mostly, and prayed through the intercession of Blessed Kateri that he would be healed. And as the reports go, he was.
Kateri Tekakwitha and Marianne Cope, both now formally recognized by the Catholic Church as among the saints.
The church has its heroes, and we hold these people out as examples of what living their life in friendship with the Lord can do.
Examples, too, that for the faithful, saints are not just figures from a distant past in lands far away.
I think there's a lot of saints among us, unnamed, but saints nonetheless.
Yes, I pray, but I talk to Mother Marianne. I really do. There's never a salutation per se. It's just sort of a, okay, you've been with me this long, let's keep going.
You kind of notice how God raises up men and women in every age who are outstanding in holiness, examples of the Christian life. And God calls all people to a holiness of life, no matter what their state, no matter what their gender, no matter what their, whether they're married or single, religious or lay. God calls all of us. And here he's chosen two very different women, one from the 1600s, one from the 1800s, 1900s, to a special life of holiness.
Those who've come here to Rome for this weekend's canonization have spent much of their time visiting shrines and historic sites that dot this eternal city. They are pilgrims from a new world come to reconnect with the old. A postscript to tonight's program, Sister Mary Lawrence Hanley, who championed the cause of Mother Marianne Cope, spent decades assembling evidence to support her canonization and was aggressive in reaching out to build evidence of a miraculous intervention. Sister Mary Lawrence died last year, just days before the formal announcement of this honor for a new saint. You might think that she died disappointed, but those near her say she was aware of the pending Vatican announcement, aware her goal had been reached. She told them, "My work is done." The truth of that statement comes tomorrow here at St. Peter's Square. I'm Bill Carey in Rome for YNN. Good night.